Hey you guys, this is a quick demo on how we're going to draw an 8 by 10 grid on an 8.5 by 11 piece of typing paper. So first thing, I just need my paper, a pencil, and a ruler. And then I'm going to start by making the first kind of border of where I want my grid to go. I don't really want my grid to start right on the edge of my paper because I want a little bit of white space just for visual reasons. It looks a little bit better. So I'm going to start by just making a 1/2 inch of a border from the edge. Sorry, my cat is in the way. So that I have a little bit of wiggle room here. So I'm lining up, I'm not using 0 here because I can't see where my 0 is on my ruler very well. So I'm actually going to start at a 1/2 inch and then kind of work with this 1/2 inch here. So I'm just making a mark kind of where I see halfway on my paper at the bottom, and then the same thing at the top. And I'm going to use that as my starting point. So I'm going to connect those lines so that I have a starting point for my grid. And then that's the straight line that I'm going to use to create the rest of my grid. So I need to find 8.5 inches going across here. I'm sorry, 8, because I'm making an 8 by 10 grid on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So if I line this ruler up, I can see that my paper is in fact 8.5 inches long, but I want this to be an 8 by 10 grid. So I want, again, some wiggle room. This might be kind of confusing, but if I think my paper is 8.5 inches long and I want a grid that's going to be 8 inches long with some wiggle room, I'm going to mark off a 1/4 inch on each side. So a 1/4 inch is right here. Think 1/2 of 1/2. Here's my halfway mark. 1/4 inch is right here. So I'm making a mark at a 1/4 inch on this side, and I'm making a mark at a 1/4 inch on this side. And I can double check that this is correct by moving my ruler, starting 0 here, and making sure this is 8 inches. So I look, it's lined up at this mark on 0, and then it ends at 8. So that's where I want my grid to start. I can now make straight lines going this way by moving my ruler to the bottom of my paper. And I'm again gonna mark a 1/4 inch on both sides. So again, I'm doing 8, 8 1/4, 8.5 is the edge of my paper. And then here's 1, here's 1.75, here's 1.5, or I'm sorry, a 1/2, and then here's a 1/4. So I came in a 1/4 inch on both sides. Again, I can double check this by moving my 0 to that first mark and making sure this space that I created is 8 inches long, which it is. So now what I can do is I can connect these lines and make sure that I have 2 straight lines for the sides of my grid. And then lastly, I just need to find where my grid ends here. So we wanted an 8 by 10. So I need to mark off 10 inches across the top and the bottom to get the second edge of my grid. So I'm gonna line up 0 right here. And I'm gonna make a mark at 10. And then I'm gonna move my ruler to the bottom of my paper. And I'm gonna make a mark at 10. And then I'm gonna connect those. All right, so now I have the space that I need to work in, but I need to turn this into a grid now that I can actually draw my picture inside. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a mark at every inch along this grid so that I have an 8 by 10 inch area that I'm working within. It may be smart to darken up these lines so you know that this is the space that you're working within. I think it's helpful to kind of see what you're doing a little bit more. I don't want the lines inside of my grid to be too dark because that's going to distract from my picture. But because this is just the border, I can make these lines nice and dark. Okay, so now I need to actually make my grid. All I'm going to do here is line up 0 to 10, and I'm going to make a mark at every inch. Make sure we're being really precise here, not moving to the left or the right of that line. You want that mark to be right on the line where the number is. And then I move my ruler to the bottom and do the same thing, making a mark at every inch. All right, now I need to connect these lines so that I get the columns of my grid. So just like we practiced before, each time I draw a line, I make sure that it is touching on one side. I adjust the other side so that it's touching that notch as well. And then I move my hand to the middle so that the ruler does not shake while I'm drawing my line. And then I'm just sketching these lines really lightly. It's less important for this practice activity, but when we get to our actual project and drawing our grid, eventually the grid is going to be erased on our final project, not on this one. You're going to keep your grid intact for this project. But on your final, you're going to want to delete. You're going to want to erase your grid. So I'm just practicing right now, making these lines super light so that they are erasable later. And then once I'm done with these lines going across, now I need to do all of the lines facing the other way. So I need lines going this way now. So I'm going to do exactly what I just did, except this time I have 8 inches across, not 10. So I'm going to line my ruler up here at 0 and 8, make a little mark at every inch. Same thing at the bottom here. And then I repeat my steps and connect these lines, and then you'll see that grid starting to form. So that I have an overall 8 by 10 inch grid, and each of these squares is 1 inch by 1 inch. Really, really important when you're making your grids that you have straight lines, otherwise the proportion of your drawing is going to be distorted. Okay, then I have a nice 8 by 10 inch grid to work from. So when I have my 8 by 10 inch line drawing printed off, I'll be able to look at that piece of paper and then redraw what I'm seeing on here.